All right, let me invite everybody to come on in. Please take your seats. We're in for a very exciting talk, and afterwards it'll be followed by a book signing. I'm not absolutely sure that Deepak Chopra needs to sell more books. I think he's sold more books in 1 year than everybody you've ever met in the Aspen Institute has sold in their entire career. But he will be signing books, which will be a true treat for you all. Most of you all know that Deepak Chopra is the poet and the prophet and the evangelist of alternative medicine. But he comes at it with a solid background of science and evidence-based medicine. He has a medical doctor's degree. He is a fellow of the American College of Physicians. He has a deep background in Western science, but he also has a deep appreciation of Eastern wisdom, Oriental philosophy, Buddhist practices. In other words, his wisdom is not Eastern wisdom, his wisdom is not Western wisdom, his wisdom is timeless wisdom. I was reading one of his books, and I just want to give you one quote from his Laws of Dharma. He says, "I will ask myself daily, how can I serve and how can I help? The answers will allow me to help and serve my fellow human beings with love." As editor of Time magazine, it was my pleasure to work with him, to do many stories on alternative medicine that focused on him, and to have him as one of the Time 100 most influential people of our times. And now it's my pleasure to introduce him to the Aspen Health Forum, Dr. Deepak Chopra.
Okay, so I'm supposed to talk about happiness, and I will, but I want to give you a little background, how I end up being here on stage. It's a very long story, but, I didn't ever think that I would be doing what I'm doing. All I wanted to do was stop smoking, and here I am. So, I went to school, medical school in India, and I was in my last year of medical school when we got invitations from a number of institutions here inviting us for training in medicine. So there was a shortage of physicians in the United States. The Vietnam War was coming to an end, and we were being recruited from all over the world. And of course, the problem was that India didn't want to lose us, so they made it difficult. You couldn't leave the country with more than $8. I had an uncle in London who lent me $100, and if you know anything about Indian mythology, 108 is a very auspicious number. We will have 108 mantras, 108 prayer beads, 108 rituals. So I thought I should do something really auspicious with my $108. I went to Paris and I spent it all in one night at the Moulin Rouge. So when I arrived in New York, I had nothing. And of course, America's got so many innovative, creative ideas. One of them is a collect call. So I made a collect call to my hospital. And I said, if you need a doctor, which I wasn't, I just finished medical school, wasn't yet a qualified doctor, then you'll have to pick me up. And they were so desperate in this little place called Plainfield, New Jersey, that they sent me a helicopter. So my first experience of the United States is lifting off in a helicopter, looking out of the window, Manhattan, skyline, twilight. I thought, this must be Disney World. 20 minutes later, I'm in Plainfield, New Jersey. I report to the emergency room, which is supposed to be my first rotation. And the nurse says, you should rest, get over your jet lag. You're not supposed to start for another 4 hours or so. So I go to my dormitory, and I switch on the television set. Now, in 1970, there was no TV in India. I'd never seen television. Switch it on, it's in color. And I'm totally captivated. I'm watching Wimbledon, and suddenly they interrupt the program and they say, There's been a shootout at the local bank. Policemen have been wounded, and they're being brought to the emergency room where I'm supposed to work. I had passed all my exams, but I'd never actually seen a patient. So I had my first attack of acute panic. Shortly thereafter, the nurse calls me, and she says, "Dr. Chopra, we have an expiration." I had no idea what that word meant, but of course I didn't want to let on, so I said, "You bet, I'll be there." So quickly bounded down the stairs, and the nurse showed me to a room. There was a dead person, lots of machines, no people. In India, it was the other way around, lots of people, no machines. And I looked at this dead body, and I said to the nurse, I said, "He's dead." And she said, "I told you, we had an expiration." But my internal dialogue was, if the patient is already dead, why do they need a doctor? So I said that to her. I said, "He's already dead. What do you want me to do?" And she looked at me and she pointed her fingers at me like this. She said, "Pronounce him." I knew I was in a different world. Okay. Your soul couldn't leave your body till a medical deity, otherwise known as MD, said, "You're free now, I release you." But it's very interesting how the public projects on MDs. We are literally MDs. We're like shamans. We don't wear leather. We don't wear leopard skins. We wear white coats. We don't have feathers around our neck. We have a stethoscope. We don't chant Aborigine mantras. We chant Latin mantras. We don't dance around a fire. We dance around a CAT scanner. But there's a lot of projection, most of it unwarranted. And we have our own rituals. I knew that she wanted me to examine the pupils and do all my rituals in the face of the obvious. So having learned English in India, which is a little different from American English, I asked her for a torch, which is the English word for a flashlight. I said, "May I have a torch, please?" And she looked at me, and there were people outside now watching us, and so my nurse looks at the nurse outside, and she says, "He wants a torch." And the nurse outside looks at me, and she kind of looks me up and down, and she says, "Maybe he wants to do a cremation." So that was my introduction to American medicine. But here's what happened. In 8 hours, I found out that I had an addictive personality. I was totally addicted to the adrenaline rush of being in the emergency room. It was so exciting. It was the feeling of power, in a sense. And I was also discovering that I had surgical skills. And my mindset was, boy, I want to see the next patient. And the bloodier it is, the better. There was no sense in me at that time. And I looked around. There was no such thing as compassion. There was no such thing as this patient is suffering. There was excitement. And I just totally got into the system. And it was many years later, I went on to train in endocrinology, which is hormones, and then neuroendocrinology, which is brain chemistry. And two things started to happen. One was I was totally stressed myself. As I said, I was smoking cigarettes. I was getting smashed on weekends. I had 35 patients in the ICU and rushing all the time, 15 minutes to see a patient. Most people don't realize how unhappy physicians are. They're one of the most unhappiest segments of the population. The highest rate of addiction, alcoholism, you name it. Okay, so I was one of those people. The second thing was that my field was neuroendocrinology, as I mentioned, and that's the field of brain chemistry. And this was a very exciting time for us because as an endocrine fellow, we were beginning to identify the Neuro Peptides that literally now are recognized as the molecules of emotion. We know a lot about these Neuro Peptides. There are over 100 of them now identified. But at that time, because of a new technique called radioimmunoassay, we were measuring these Neuro Peptides just about everywhere. And to some of us, it was very clear that wherever a thought goes, wherever an emotion goes, a molecule follows. And these molecules of emotion were identified as neuropeptides. Neuro because they were in the brain, peptides because they're protein molecules. Soon we discovered that there were receptors to these neuropeptides in every part of the body that we looked at. So when people started to look at immune cells, for example, there were little receptor sites for these peptides, the molecules of emotion. So your immune system, which helps you fight, amongst other things, cancer, infection, the ravages of aging, your immune system is eavesdropping on your internal dialogue. Somebody inside you is having a conversation with themselves all the time. In a moment, let's try and figure out who this person is and what their local address might be for the time being. But I think you'll agree, whoever this person is, he or she or it never shuts up. This conversation is going on all the time. It's happening right now as you're evaluating what I'm saying. It happens in your dreams. It happens in your sleep. And your immune cells are listening. Not only are your immune cells listening, they are participating in this conversation. Because immune cells make the same peptides that your brain makes when you experience emotions or thoughts. If you ask a good neurobiologist today, what's the essential difference between the immune system and the nervous system? If they've kept up with their science, they'll tell you there is no difference. The immune system is a circulating nervous system. It remembers, it makes choices, it has memory, it learns from its ancestors, and so on. To make things even more interesting, when we started to look at other parts of the body, stomach cells, for example, same thing. So today, if you say, I have a gut feeling about such and such, you're not speaking metaphorically at all. You're speaking literally. Your gut makes the same chemicals that your brain makes when you think. In fact, I would suggest that you can trust your gut feelings a little more because your gut cells haven't yet learned how to doubt their own feelings. 65% of our heart cells today are known as neurocardiocytes, which means that while the heart acts as a pump, a mechanical pump, it also makes the molecules of emotion. So today, if you say, my heart is weeping with sadness, or it's full of joy, love, compassion, your heart is a different heart structurally because it's made up of molecules. Your heart is made up of molecules. Those molecules are different in different states of awareness, different states of consciousness. Well, to make a long story short, this was a big breakthrough for those of us who were interested in this field, which subsequently came to be called mind-body medicine, which is really not totally accurate because it's a deeper understanding of how consciousness influences our biology. But for us, the most important breakthrough was that, the mind had escaped the brain. It's not in the brain. It only speaks in English with an Indian accent in the brain. Your mind is in all the cells of your body. In fact, one of my colleagues who later on became the chief of brain chemistry at the NIH and then professor at Georgetown, Candace Pert, who wrote the book Molecules of Emotion, she would very frequently say, even in those days, that your body is your mind. Your body is your mind. In fact, she said, it's the battleground where you wage the wars with yourself. And she said that 35 years ago. In any case, for me, two things started to happen. First, a personal quest, trying to understand why people want to be healthy. You ask somebody, why do you want to be healthy? And they'll give you many reasons, but ultimately, if you keep saying why, they'll say, I want to be happy. Or why do you want to be successful? Or why do you want a good relationship? Or why do you want to make money? Or why do you want to do anything? I think the final answer is always happiness. It's the goal of all other goals. So this became a personal quest for me. What makes people happy? And I naturally resorted to my own wisdom tradition, which is the mindset of Buddhism and a deeper philosophy that is called Vedanta. But in the meanwhile, I was also talking to brain researchers here and scientists who actually do study happiness. And I think it's important to understand that when you're happy, your biology is different, first of all. And when you have an internal state of joy, when you have an internal state of happiness, when you're experiencing love or compassion or any of these emotions that we call spiritual emotions, your biology is quite different. This morning I mentioned that your body makes oxytocin and serotonin and opiates and dopamine, which are not only antidepressants, but have a lot of other kind of consequences. People have more self-esteem when they're happy. Their biology behaves differently. Their immune system functions differently. So happiness has biological consequences that have directly to do with your health. So a few years ago, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who's been here at the Aspen Institute, he asked a number of scientists in the field of what is called positive psychology to come up with what is the research on happiness. And believe it or not, the scientists came up with what they call the happiness formula. So here's the happiness formula. Happiness, H, is equal to three things. The first is something called the brain set point. And I'll explain what that is. So the first is a set point in the brain. The second is conditions of living. So happiness is equal to S plus C, conditions of living. And the third is voluntary actions, voluntary choices. So H is equal to S plus C plus V, according to these brain scientists. Okay, so what's the brain set point? Brain set point is a mechanism which we acquire in childhood as a result of conditioning. And basically, there are two categories that these scientists divide people in. One is people who look at a situation and see a creative opportunity. Other people look at the same situation and see a problem. Obviously, the people who see problems are the unhappy people, and the people who see opportunities are the happy people. According to this research, the brain set point determines, and I'm quoting the research, so it's not mine, the brain set point determines about 43% or 42%, somewhere in that range, to your total happiness experience. Can the brain set point be changed? Because it's conditioned. It's a result of your childhood, your upbringing, and according to some people, even genetic. But that's another story. I'll talk about genes in a moment. Can it be changed? And yes, it can be changed. Of course, temporarily, it can be influenced even by antidepressants, but that's not a long-term solution. It can be changed by cognitive therapy, which is a form of therapy where you question your limiting beliefs. And apparently, the brain set point is influenced through meditation. When you practice stillness, self-reflection, reflective self-inquiry, quieten your internal dialogue, you have the secretion of these peptides in the frontal cortex that actually changes your brain set point. So it can be changed. That's about 42-43% of your happiness experience. The second component of the formula is conditions of living. And primarily that refers to, basically financial conditions of living, but also to, what's happening in your life. Are you in the midst of a divorce? Have you had an injury? Are you in physical pain, etc.? Interestingly enough, this part of the formula, according to the research, contributes about 7 to 11% of your total happiness experience, which is not very significant if you think about it. So if you win the lottery today and you win $20 million, you'll be ecstatic for a while, but at the end of 1 year, all the research shows that you'll be as happy or as unhappy as you were before you won the lottery. Your basal set point doesn't change by winning the lottery. In fact, in 5 years, you'll probably be much more, you'll be unhappy than you were in the beginning, because now you're worrying about the stock market and this and that. Before, you didn't know what it was. So financial security does not really give much, is not a big contributor. In fact, the research suggests that there are two categories of people that are definitely unhappy: the extremely rich and the extremely poor. The extremely rich are unhappy because all they think about is money. And the extremely poor are also unhappy because all they think about is money. And happiness is not having to think about it. So it adds about 7 to 11%. What was even more interesting is that if you have a devastating experience, like a messy divorce, or you lose a family member, or you get paralyzed after an accident, within 1 year you'll have recovered, which is amazing to think about it. You know, you see this person who's paraplegic and their life you think would be finished forever, but within a year or two, you know, human consciousness is so flexible that they adjust. In fact, they find reasons for living that they hadn't before. So once again, the second, conditions of living, is a very minor component to your overall happiness experience, which still leaves about 50% of the happiness experience, which is voluntary actions. And what the research showed is that every day you can make choices that either are for your personal pleasure, and so personal pleasure in this country apparently fell into the following categories: sex, going out for dinner to a fancy restaurant, and a big one was shopping. Apparently people really enjoy that experience and gives them a lot of pleasure. So if you make voluntary choices every day that are for your personal pleasure, that will give you a transient experience of happiness, maybe a day or so. And the other category of voluntary choices is those choices that make other people happy, or those choices that give you meaning and purpose and give you creative expression. In fact, the research showed that the easiest way to be happy is to make somebody else happy, period. So that's the formula, the happiness formula. About a year ago, we were with His Holiness in Vancouver, and somebody, you know, after having presented this research, somebody said, so if we do this, you know, if we practice, we change our brain set point, we make other people happy, and, you know, does that guarantee happiness? And His Holiness said, no, it will make you happier, but it won't make you happy. And that is because human beings have this other existential disease that we worry about the future and have regrets about the past. We have resentments, grievances, regrets, shame, all those wonderful emotions that guarantee our unhappiness. So if you hurt a dog, for example, and you injure it, the dog has memory. It will remember, and you meet the dog 15 years later, it might attack you. But unlike a human being, it won't plan for 15 years how to get even. No, that's a human condition. We also, of course, worry about the future. We worry about getting old. We worry about getting sick. That whole conversation here right now, before I started, was about, you know, how can we take care of our future, basically. We worry about old age, disease, and of course we worry about the biggest thing, which is death. You know, animals don't have the experience of actually reflecting on death, but we do. So for this, there is no research. What I'm going to share with you is that can only be found in the great wisdom traditions of the world. And of course, my wisdom tradition is, as I said, Buddhism and Vedanta, and most of you probably are familiar with the story of the Buddha, a young prince who has all the comforts of his life, and at the tender age of 16 or so, he goes outside the palace walls for the first time. His father has prevented him from seeing any suffering in the world. The father's a king. He wants his son to be the next monarch. There's a prediction when the child is born that either he'll become a great monarch or he'll become a monk. And of course, the king doesn't want his son to be a monk. He wants him to be the greatest monarch of all time. So Prince Siddhartha goes out of the palace walls. He bribes his best friend, who's a stable boy, that takes care of the horses in the palace, and they go out into the night. And for the first time, Siddhartha sees a very old, infirm person, because the person, sure that Siddhartha would not even see old age and decrepitude. And so he asks his friend, "What's that?" And his friend says, "That's extreme old age and decrepitude." And Siddhartha says, "Does that happen to everyone?" And his friend says, "If you live long enough, sure, it's a high likelihood." And then they see a man with leprosy and extreme disability, and finally they see a dead body. And Siddhartha asks his friend, he says, "Does that happen to everyone? Does everyone die?" And he says, "Yes, everyone dies." And Siddhartha says, "Will I die?" And his friend says, "Of course you will." So that starts this turmoil in this young prince. He can't sleep anymore, and he begins his journey, which is a very fascinating story because he tries everything. When he leaves the palace, he becomes a monk, he tries everything, and nothing actually works. He tries yoga and all the extreme forms of lore, but what exactly happened was Siddhartha his breath, which is now, of course, one of the techniques for meditation, mindful breathing. But he was watching his breath, and he saw that it arises and then it subsides. There's an arising and a subsiding. And he watches his thoughts, and he sees that they arise and they subside. He looks at his emotions, and he says, they arise, they subside. He looks at his own body, and he says, once upon a time, this was a baby's body, a teenager's body, and now it's this, and it's going to be different tomorrow. And so he comes to his first conclusion, which is so simple. It's, Buddha is not a prophet or not a messiah or anything. He's the most amazing psychologist ever. So his first conclusion is, if it is of the nature of arising, it is also of the nature of subsiding. Whatever arises must subside. And that's the first Dharma seal, as they call it, the law of impermanence. And he says most of our suffering comes from the idea of being attached to the idea of permanence in a field that's inherently impermanent. So that's his first conclusion. But then he has a very interesting conclusion that he comes to, and that is that, and he comes to it just through simple observation, because, he's saying there's the arising and there's the subsiding, but it comes from a field of consciousness that neither arises nor subsides. And that's a great insight. I'd like you to try something right now. As you're listening to me, just turn your attention to who's listening. So as you're listening to me, become aware of the listener. And there's a core consciousness there. Buddha never used the word soul, but that's what the Vedantists call that core consciousness. And that consciousness was there when you were a baby, was there when you were a teenager. You had a different body, different mind, different emotions. And he came to a very interesting conclusion. He said, hang on to this, because the only part of you that is neither arising nor subsiding. It's transcendent. He never used the word soul because he wasn't a religious person. But there's a core consciousness, a background of non-change in the range. And he said, this is your ticket to freedom. So with this, he came to certain other conclusions. One of them was that when you get in touch with your core consciousness, you also realize that there's no such thing as a separate self. Your body is recycled earth, water, and air. Your emotions are recycled energy. Your thoughts are recycled information. Your personality is recycled relationships. So, there's no such thing as a truly separate self. And when you go a little deeper, you'll find through your experience, not through some intellectual inquiry, but through direct experience, that you and what you call yourself are inseparable from all that exists. And when you experience that, he said, you will have what the Buddhists call divine attitudes. And he described them as 4. Number 1, loving kindness, which is a very Buddhist phrase. Number 2, compassion. Number 3, joy at the success of others. And number 4, equanimity. And you can't act these out. You can't pretend to have these. You can only have these attitudes if you have experienced that part of your being that is connected to all that exists. And this was a great insight 2,500 years ago. So he said there's no separate self. And then he also said, which is really so counterintuitive, but so true, he said there's no such thing as linear cause-effect. And there are no such things as objects by themselves. In fact, one of his sermons, he was holding a flower in his hand, like that. Can you hand me that flower for a second?
Just one flower?
Yeah, just one flower. So here he is in the Deer Park in Benares, and he's holding a flower in his hand, and there are about 12, 15 people, and they're all in silence. And one of them, his disciple Ananda, suddenly gets it. And so he says, tell me what this is. And Ananda says, this is rainbows and sunshine and earth and water and wind and air and the infinite void and the whole universe pretending to be a flower. So just like there's no separate self, every object is a conspiracy of the total universe. And what he called interdependent co-arising. That everything that happens in the world is an interdependent co-arising from the level of consciousness we're in. In any case, that's 2,500 years ago. But today, science, in its cutting-edge research, is asking the most important question that humanity has asked for thousands of years. So we've asked questions for thousands of years. Is there meaning or purpose in our existence? Is life an accident? Is everything random? Do we have a soul? Does God exist? What happens to die? And if God exists, does God care about us? And, we've had to resort to the wisdom of great seers, the wisdom of great prophets, and yet we've come so far in our understanding of the nature of the universe that some of that wisdom or some of the religious literature that we have access to, we find very disconcerting because it has nothing to do with what we know about the world through science. It really has answers to some of the big questions. But so we know about evolution, we know cosmology, we know about the Big Bang. But one of the things that science is still struggling with is consciousness. And for 300 years, more or less, science has ignored the nature of consciousness. It's not our business. It's the business of religion. But after all, consciousness is an aspect of our existence. We are conscious beings. And so in the last maybe 50 years or so, there have been two schools of thought looking at consciousness. One school of thought says that consciousness is a byproduct or an epiphenomenon of your biology. Okay, so just like your gallbladder secretes pancreas, creates pancreas, stomach makes hydrochloric acid. So if you have thoughts and feelings and emotions and desires and imagination, if you fall in love, if you believe in God or heaven or hell or salvation or damnation, it's the dance of molecules. We'll figure it out. But the more we learn about the nature of our brains, the more elusive consciousness becomes. I want to share this with you because it's so important, because there's a new science that is creeping slowly, and it's slowly gathering momentum, which says that consciousness is not a product of our brains, but consciousness is the ground of existence which localizes through our brain. But I'll come to that in a moment. Let me just take you through an experience, okay? Imagine right now, and you don't have to close your eyes, imagine that you're looking at a beautiful sunset over the mountains. Do you see a picture? Do you have the experience that you're seeing a picture of a sunset, right? Where is that picture? If I went inside your brain, do you think I would see a picture of a sunset? And today we can go inside the brain. You know, we have all kinds of wonderful technology. Magnetic resonance scans, positron emission tomography. You can take a carbon atom, you can radio label it, you can put it in sugar molecule, and you can track a thought. So what do I see when I go inside your brain? When you're looking at a beautiful sunset, all you're seeing is synaptic networks with electrical firing, basically electromagnetic currents that go on and off in your brain. There's no picture. If I asked you to imagine the sound of your mother's voice, or the sound of a newborn baby crying, or I asked you to imagine the taste of strawberries, or I asked you to imagine the smell of your locker room in your gym, you have an internal experience. That experience is in your consciousness, not in your brain. Okay, what's in the brain? Synaptic networks that fire on-off signals. Now here's something else. You're looking at this flower, and you say, what color is it? Red, right? So you say, that's the nature of this flower. But let's examine this just for a moment, okay? There are electromagnetic waves coming from here, photons, to your eyes, and those photons have no color. Okay? If they had, we'd see red beams of light going from here to your eyes. Okay? They are invisible. Those photons are totally invisible. They're going from here to your brain, and they have no color. They're just a particular frequency of electromagnetic radiation. In turn, when they cause disturbances in your retina, they send an electrical impulse to your brain, has no color. There's a synaptic network that goes on and off, has no color. So where's the color? It's in your consciousness. You know, so very slowly, science is coming to, through its own methodologies, coming to a conclusion that wisdom traditions spoke about. And they said, you're not in the world is in you. You're not in the body is in you. And you're not in the mind is in you. And that you is a core consciousness that transcends space and time, that has no beginning, no ending. And that's what the religious traditions have said, what Jesus called the kingdom of heaven, I carefully read for the 1000th time the New Testament. And it's so clear that we're talking about somebody who had an experience of God consciousness. You read Gospel of John, chapter 10, around verse 20, when Jesus says, I and God are one. Because God is another word for the mystery of the universe. And the crowd gets very upset. They want to kill him. And he says, many good works have I shown you. For which of these do you stone me? And they say, we stone you not for a good work that you do. We stone you for blasphemy. Because you, being a man, call yourself a god. And he, being a good Jewish rabbi, he knows his Old Testament, he quotes from something that was written in 1,000 years before his time, in the time of King David. It's called the Song of Asaph. And he says, is it not written in your law, I said, that you are gods? And if it can be said of those through whom the word of God came, that you are gods, why do you say I blaspheme? And, in the Bible, the logos is considered very important. Logos is the word, is the knowledge, is the consciousness. So it's not particularly Eastern. It is there in all the religious traditions. What Jesus is speaking of is what the Jews call the Ruach Adonai. That we are part of one breath. We are right now breathing the same breath. As a result of breathing the same breath, we're also sharing the same molecules. Walt Whitman said, every atom that belongs to you as well belongs to me. And today you can do a little bit of mathematics and radioactive isotope studies that will prove without a shadow of doubt that right now you have in your body at least 1 million atoms that were once in the body of Moses or Christ or Buddha or Genghis Khan or whoever else you want to think about. In just the last 3 weeks, a quadrillion atoms, which is 10 followed by 15 zeros, have gone through your body that have gone through the body of every other living species on this planet. So think of a tree in Africa, a peasant in China, a taxi driver in Calcutta. You have stuff in your body that was circulating there only 3 weeks ago. We are one ecology, we are one mind, we are one consciousness, one breath, and one body, one energy field. And if we don't recognize that, it's all the suffering in the world. All the suffering in the world comes from the socially induced hallucination of the separate self. All of it. So, that basically is the essence of finding true happiness. Now, let me share with you a little bit of cutting-edge science, which is controversial, but I'll share it with you. Because there are lots of books out there that are talking about it, written by good scientists. As you know, there's the whole debate going on right now between what are called creationists and the other, Darwinian evolutionists. Both sides of the debate have been hijacked by Time magazine, a brilliant cover story where there was a conversation between Richard Dawkins and Francis Collins. Now, as you know, Richard Dawkins is the eminent atheist of our times. You've obviously read or know about the God delusion. Dawkins is an 18th century atheist. He's talking about a God that nobody should believe in. Okay, so it's irrelevant what he's talking about. But that debate between him and Francis Collins, who's the head of the Genome Project, you can't get better credentials than Francis Collins. And Francis Collins is a practicing Christian. Okay, and Collins says in the debate, in that Time magazine cover story, at one point, he says to Dawkins, Richard, the reason you can't find God is you're looking in the wrong place. Okay? Because God, or the mystery, or whatever you call it, the consciousness that seems to be the ground of being, does not exist in space or time. And there's a little bit of conversation over there where Francis Collins talks about, the intelligence at the heart of creation is outside of space-time. He says that. But it's not followed up because obviously Dawkins did not know what he was talking about. He had no idea what Francis Collins was talking about. But here's some science. Today, if you go to fundamental scientists who examine the most fundamental levels of activity in nature, they'll tell you that nature is a discontinuity. Let me explain that. I won't go into too many details, but discontinuity is something that goes on and off. So even though our senses give us the experience of continuity, when I look at you and I look at things here, there's continuity. But according to particle physicists, quantum physicists, that's a trick of our senses. The essential nature of the physical universe is that it's not physical. It's a fluctuation of energy and information in a huge void. And, we don't need to think of this as a speculative idea. It's the basis of our technology. Today, if you can send somebody email or surf the information highway on the internet or text message someone, it's all based on a very fundamental premise in science. And that is that the essential nature of the material world is that it's not material. That the essential nature of the physical world is that it's not physical. That the essential stuff of the universe is non-stuff. It's the basis, as I said, of all our technology that we take for granted today. And at the most fundamental levels, this is energy and information that's vibrating at the speed of light. So if you go to a movie, for example, you see continuity on the screen, but when you go to the projection room, you see that a movie is a series of still frames that goes on and off. But if I move the reel fast enough, about 24 frames a second, then I see a movie, a motion picture. It's not a motion picture. It's the still frames going on and off. If you've seen old Charlie Chaplin movies, you see how jerky they are because the frame wasn't moving fast enough. Okay, when you see a Christmas light going around a Christmas tree, there's no light actually traveling around the tree. Light bulbs are going on and off in a certain sequence. And your senses are not sharp enough to see that. Okay, so like that, according to particle physicists, everything in nature is the expression of discontinuity. Photons, electrons, subatomic particles that are going on and off. We cannot perceive that with our senses. But your physical body is doing the same thing right now, at that level. And the essential question in science is not what's in the vibration, but what's in between the vibration. What's in the discontinuity? Okay, so between this vibration and this vibration, there's a little space. What's happening there? And I'm going to share with you 5 insights that are not controversial. Okay, they're not controversial. They're today's science, if you keep up with the science. I'll tell you what the controversy is in a moment. But the 5 things that all scientists agree about the discontinuity. First thing they say, that the discontinuity has no energy, no information, no space-time, and no objects. No energy, no information, no space-time, no objects. So what's there? And the best answer that science can give is there are infinite possibilities. They say it's a superposition of fields of possibility, number 1. Number 2, the discontinuity is a field of non-local correlation. It's a huge history. I'm not going to go into it, but pick up the April issue of Scientific American. It's got the picture of Einstein on the cover, and it says, "Was Einstein wrong?" And it's the whole history of what science today refers to as entanglement, which means everything in the universe is correlated with everything else in the universe. And this is faster than the speed of light. It's instantaneous. It's synchronistic, and it's simultaneous. So, and it explains how biological organisms and nature functions not one thing at a time, but everything all at once. And the human body, for example, has 100 trillion cells, which is more than all the stars in the Milky Way galaxy. Every cell in your body is doing 100,000 things per second. And every cell instantly knows how to correlate its activity with every other cell. How does a human body think thoughts and play a piano and kill germs and remove toxins and make a baby all at once? And while you're doing that, your body can track the movement of stars and planets because your biological rhythms are the symphony of the whole universe. Okay, so that's the second attribute of the discontinuity. The third attribute is something called uncertainty. The deeper you go into it, the more uncertain the laws of nature become. Now, I was speaking to my friend Ellen Langer, who's a professor at Harvard now, but she was one of our colleagues when we were all students in Boston 30 years ago. And Ellen Langer said the most cruel mindset you can have is certainty, because it kills your creativity. Nature at a fundamental level proliferates with uncertainty. And the more the uncertainty, the more the creativity. Nature is constantly taking quantum leaps of creativity. That's the heart of this debate between evolutionists and creationists, because they're not looking at the inherent creativity of nature, which is so prolific that it's unimaginable. So that's the fourth quality of the discontinuity, creativity. And the fifth is something called observer effect, something that was first popularized by a very great scientist by the name of John Wheeler, who was professor with Einstein at Princeton. He just died last year. There was a nice write-up in a lot of wonderful magazines at the age of 97. And he was still a professor at Princeton. And John Wheeler, about 40 years ago, said that the physical universe does not exist unless there's a conscious observer looking at it. So if there are no conscious observers, the physical universe remains a vibration of photons. That vibration of photons comes alive in your consciousness. So anyway, this is not controversial. This is all science. The controversial part is that there's a cutting-edge number of scientists who are just at the cutting edge of what we call neuroscience, quantum physics, mathematics, who are saying that the discontinuity is consciousness, that it is the ground of being that differentiates into everything that we call energy, information, space-time, and the objects of matter. And as I said, this is controversial, but there's a lot of scientists who are saying. The wisdom traditions, the one that I come from, says there are 4 ways to do it, to get in touch with this experientially, to get in touch with, this part of you which is divine, for lack of a better word, where you have these qualities of compassion and love and kindness and understanding and intuition and insight and inspiration and imagination and creativity. And these 4 are referred to as the 4 types of yoga. Yoga is such a popular word now. It's become mainstream. But I don't think most people know that yoga means the same thing as yoke or union. So when Jesus says, "My yoke is easy and my burden is light," he's talking about yoga, the connection to the source. Okay? And it's actually quite simple. 4 types of yoga: the yoga of being, the yoga of feeling, the yoga of thinking, and the yoga of action. So we start out as beings. When a child comes into existence, it's pure being. And so, according to the philosophy of yoga, that's the highest form of human intelligence. Because the intelligence at the heart of the universe is going through this baby without any editing. That's why a child is the most intelligent part of the human species. The second, and the yoga of being, you access that through silence, through reflection, through prayer, through meditation. The second yoga is the yoga of feeling. the second highest form based on the yoga of being, and that is the experience that we call love and compassion. That love and compassion are not mere sentiments, they are the ultimate truth at the heart of creation, where everything is inseparable. And when you experience that, you cannot help but experience love and compassion. The third yoga is the yoga of thinking, and the highest form of thinking is creativity, because we participate in the creative process of the universe. Our consciousness is one with the consciousness at the heart of creation. So that's the third highest form of human intelligence. And the fourth highest form of human intelligence is doing, which comes last, because we are human beings first, human feeling second, human thinking third, and human doing last. And that is called karma yoga. It's the doing that comes from service. It's the doing that says, how can I help? It's the doing that says that my purpose in life is to be an instrument for that intelligence to choose evolution over entropy. And so there you have it. It's that simple. Being, feeling, thinking, and doing. But we've got it the other way around. If you look at activity here outside, what are people doing? They're just doing. And what are they doing? It's all about me. All the doing is about me. And then second comes thinking, and thinking is also about me. And feeling is emotional control dramas. And there's no being at all. So you want to be happy? You have to reverse the whole thing. Start with being, get into the feeling that is the most authentic feeling, and then from there access your creativity and help the world become a better place. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, there will be a book signing in the lobby by Deepak Chopra.